I'm Ihor Havryshchak. I'm pleased to welcome our guest, writer, publicist, and TV presenter, Rostislav Murzagulov. Hello, Rostislav. Good afternoon, Igor. Glad to welcome you and your viewers. Your Ukrainian is beautiful. Thank you, I try. Rostislav, a lot has happened in recent days, especially in the United States. It seems as if Trump has activated some internal button. He has suddenly changed his rhetoric. In order not to speak for myself, I will quote authoritative American media. For example, the New York Post writes that Putin is not happy. Trump and Congress are getting closer to Ukraine. Trump has already agreed to supply arms to Ukraine. According to the New York Post and the New York Times, Putin missed the chance to establish a dialogue with Trump. In light of these events, the American media noted a sharp change in Trump's rhetoric. He accused Putin of cruelty, called him a dangerous man, and said that he was responsible for the deaths of people. Trump also announced his intention to sell arms to Ukraine through NATO. And we are talking not only about defensive, but also offensive weapons. Alexei, what does this mean? Have we witnessed a real turnaround, or are we just mistaken in our perception? Igor, it's obvious. Trump may have seen our stream, where we predicted his move to support Ukraine, and it seems he decided not to disappoint us. Our prediction came true, and seriously, it's pretty simple. Trump is a political animal. This is not an insult, but a political science term found in academic literature. He is not driven by emotion, but by ratings and political expediency.
Это я сейчас не ругаюсь, это есть такой термин в политологии, вполне себе в серьезных учебниках встречающийся. Он соткан весь из не из тонких запахов конфета, как кто-то пел когда-то, а вот он соткан из рейтингов, из политической целесообразности.
Today, if you look at the dynamics of Americans' electoral preferences, you can see a rapid decline in support for Trump's Ukraine policy. This is due to the fact that Americans invariably perceive their country as the leader of the free world. For them, the situation is simple and unambiguous. There is an aggressor, and there are people who seek to live in a democratic society, together with the United States, Europe, and other civilized countries. Many still call Putin a communist despot, and in many ways rightly so. Trump's actions toward Ukraine can hardly be called anything other than treasonous. He has realized that he has gone too far, and the current drop in ratings caused by the Ukrainian issue may become irreversible.
И то, что делал Трамп в адрес этой страны, я, естественно, об Украине, иначе как кидаловым, конечно, не назовешь. И поэтому Трамп понял, что сейчас действительно можно доиграться, и этот рейтинг, это падение из-за вот ситуации по Украине, это может уже стать необратимым.
He realized and started to rectify the situation. To what extent he will succeed is not yet clear, but the numbers of support for Ukraine and dissatisfaction with his policies look very revealing. Everything remains ambiguous. Interestingly, part of the wave of support for Ukraine was provoked by Elon Musk. By announcing the creation of a party and his intention to challenge Trump, he actually launched an election campaign and got Americans thinking about the election cycle earlier than usual. And as the campaign has begun, anyone with experience in PR and political technology, and Trump is certainly competent in these matters, realizes that there is no more time to play games with Putin.
Но, соответственно, так как, по сути, кампания началась, то любой подкованный в пиаре и политтехнологиях человек, а Трамп, безусловно, он, наверное, больше ни в чем-то не подкован, а в этом-то да. И, соответственно, вот он, поняв, что все, шутки кончились, и уже больше нет времени на заигрывание с Путиным.
He has begun to do everything you mentioned earlier. Rostislav, what do you think the Kremlin's reaction will be? There are two lines, the one voiced by Medvedev and the one presented by Peskov. Peskov speaks more diplomatically, while Medvedev writes frankly. He said that neither Russia nor its supreme commander-in-chief reacted in any way to Trump's insults or his decisions to supply arms to Ukraine, even through third countries. I also recall Medvedev's statement where he bluntly says, negotiations are only necessary to continue the war. Peskov commented on the CNN story after the network published an audio recording in which Trump threatens Putin. If Russia attacks Ukraine, he will hit Moscow with aerial bombs. That conversation took place before the full-scale invasion. Peskov either knows about it or he doesn't. He could confirm or deny, but stated, I don't know, maybe fake, maybe not. There is too much information right now. Obviously, he's avoiding a direct answer. What the Kremlin's actual reaction is remains an open question. Will they try to smooth over sharp corners, or will they be frightened by Trump's reaction and compromise? Medvedev's words in this context are difficult to take seriously. His position is not always clear. You certainly remember how Trump reacted. Who is this guy and where does he work? Is this the official position of the Russian government? Such a pejorative remark sounds harsh, but quite apt. After all, the deputy head of the Security Council is speaking on behalf of whom? Shoigu, the leadership himself? Everything looks vague. In fact, Medvedev is acting as a blogger, not as a representative of the government.
Заместитель руководителя Совета Безопасности, который решает что? Который высказывается от имени кого? От имени руководителя Совета Безопасности? От имени Шойгу, что ли? Или от имени чего? Вот это же очень такая эфемерная штука. Поэтому, в общем-то, по сути, Медведев работает блогером.
This blogger is struggling to maintain his position. When he worked in the liberal wing under Putin, it became clear that it was just a role. All his statements about freedom, democracy, and the need to restrain the Siloviki were part of a script set by Putin himself, who was trying to win the trust of the liberal part of Russian society in this way. As a result, Medvedev played the role of a deceiver, diverted attention, and helped to finally destroy everything liberal in the country. I have a personal grudge against him. We talked, and I thought at the time that he was speaking sincerely, that there was hope for the country. Alas, it turned out to be an illusion. Now Medvedev is trying to look like a convinced militarist, demonstrating his absolute loyalty to Putin, and on the pages of his blog, he promotes the same aggressive rhetoric.
И что, значит, поэтому вот он предлагает, соответственно, все то, что он предлагает на страницах своего блога.
Many believe that Medvedev's statements are a kind of reactionary test. When it comes to Trump, they are probably coordinated with Putin personally. This is especially true of his sharp retort that Trump will never win the Nobel Prize, and that Russia is allegedly ready to hand over nuclear weapons to Iran. The statement was clearly intended to test the US response, what Americans are willing to do for their interests in Iran. The response was swift. Trump demonstrated his lack of piety toward Russia, and the Kremlin instantly backpedaled. Medvedev, as if on cue, denied what he had said, saying that his words had been misinterpreted. In fact, he played his usual role, that of an expressive blogger performing a political maneuver at the behest of the top. It all looked like part of Putin's script.
В этом контексте, и они моментально сдали назад. Медведев, в общем-то, исполнил, значит, обычную присядку, которую танцует перед Рамзаном Кадыровым, моментально все опроверг, все, значит, передумал и сказал, что нет, это вообще я не про то имел в виду. Соответственно, понятно, что там все это было согласовано, и это было определенной игрой со стороны Путина.
Putin played the role of the bear, playing the soft image. But now such statements are unlikely to elicit a vivid reaction from Trump. This is no longer a trigger for his anger, but rather a reflection of new realities, which is evident not only in Medvedev's words but also in the programs of Solovyov and other propagandists. The talking points that Trump is the enemy, America is the enemy, are becoming more and more frequent, a sign that the hope for forgiveness, a return to previous trade relations or unfreezing of funds is fading. They will continue to terrorize Ukraine, but it can't last indefinitely. Resources are limited, and army casualties are growing at a colossal rate.
Сейчас их пустят обратно в торговлю, замороженные деньги им вернут. Да, это говорит о том, что они будут пытаться еще нас с вами терроризировать здесь, в Украине, какое-то время, но это время тоже конечно, у них нет бесконечных ресурсов на эту войну. Они истребляют там свою армию просто с какими-то безумными совершенно темпами.
Yesterday, there was a report about the liberation of a small Dhaka village near the administrative border of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. According to the military themselves, 4,200 people were killed in this episode. Just think about it. For the sake of a flag, for the sake of a picture, thousands of fighters were sent to attack an area where, judging by the footage, there are only foresters' lodges. This is already the territory of Dnipropetrovsk region, but the essence does not change. The action, in fact, is senseless and monstrous. In any other normal country in the world, such a tragedy would be a reason for a military revolt. Imagine if Belgium attacked a French resort town and lost 4,200 troops. Absurd, right? Even in a tense region like the Middle East, such losses would spark a huge scandal. But in Russia, silence. Thousands of dead soldiers and no reaction. It's a land of warped mirrors, where tragedy is ignored and absurdity is normal.
Сейчас представьте себе, какая-нибудь Бельгия вот так вот бы на кого-нибудь напала, 4200 человек положила бы в дачном поселке во Франции. Ну, это я сейчас, ладно, Бельгия с Францией, понятно, не будут воевать. Ну, хорошо, даже если это будут какие-то страны, ну, не знаю, в арабском мире, еще где-то, да. В арабо-израильском конфликте кто-то положил бы 4200 человек. Там бы это вызвало скандал, понимаете?
Rostislav, it is impossible not to think of Sergei Starovoyt, the former head of the Russian Transport Ministry, against whom testimony has emerged in cases committed while he was governor of the Kursk region. How do you perceive this? Is it the fear of officials of possible reprisals or another mop-up on Putin's orders? In a democratic country, resignation is a normal step, not involving a threat to one's life. But in Russia, as soon as a person leaves office, either prison or disappearance awaits him.
Пойти в отставку в нормальной, в другой стране, это адекватно, это нормально, это не угрожает твоей жизни. А вот я вижу в России, только ты у власти идешь в отставку, тебе или тюрьма, или ты самоликвидируешься.
This is a mafia structure, not a state, a large criminal formation headed by the Pahan, who holds power illegitimately, relying on the conceptual rules inherent in the mafia. Brutality between the participants of this system becomes the norm. If a person is eliminated, even under the guise of suicide, the signs of torture on his body and leaks to the media say otherwise. It was probably the elimination of a witness capable of testifying against Putin's inner circle, including the Rotenberg family. The ends were mopped up because the threat came from a circle connected to Putin's daughter, Tikhonova.
То, значит, мы делаем вывод, что все-таки это, конечно, в любом случае устранение человека, который дал бы показания на близких путинских друзей, на вот эту семью Ротенбергов. И, значит, таким образом они зачистили концы, причем эти концы возникли благодаря атаке вот того самого кружка той самой Тихоновой, то есть путинской дочери.
They are actually turning Putin's power structure into a unitary one. They now plan to leave only one clan. Many people have already joined them. At Starovoyt's funeral, I noticed many people I know personally, ministers Maksut Shadayev, Maxim Reshetnikov, and others. Their presence was a marker for me, especially when you consider that Anton Alikhanov was there. Participation in such a high-profile event draws attention not only to the death itself, but also to the situation of the Rotenbergs, who may be on the verge of political collapse. When figures like Alikhanov and Kemezov, representatives of the so-called circle of old robbers to which the Rotenbergs used to belong, appear next to each other, it indicates that a redistribution of forces is taking place.
Этой смерти, а значит, к обсуждению того, что Ротенберги находятся на волосок от политической гибели, и когда там находятся люди, которые являются плоть от плотью, например, как Алиханов, Чемезов, Это вот тот самый кружок стариков-разбойников, да, в который раньше входили Ротенберги тоже.
The funeral was attended by representatives of the Patrushev clan, including Minister Oksana Lut, whom the Yellow Press links to Patrushev Jr. Whether they had a connection is a personal question, but Lut's belonging to Patrushev's circle is obvious. This indicates that the Patrushev clan is strengthening its positions. In this situation, one gets the feeling that one should mourn for the eliminated person, regardless of whether it is Rotenberg or someone else. Formally, everyone agrees with this gesture, despite the fact that the funeral is a blow to the Rotenbergs' interests. It would have been favorable for them that everything went unnoticed, that the death was quickly forgotten, suicide, and that's all. But no, the event was made as public as possible. This is the typical logic of a system where favoritism increases at the end of a dictatorship. And the older the dictator, the brighter the flashes of internal struggle. Today, Putin's favoritism has reached its maximum degree. His main favorite is his own child. And this is irrespective of how competent she is. If you hear her public speeches, you get the impression that they are monotonous reading from a pre-written text without the slightest initiative. This demonstrates the extent of Putin's distrust of everyone else. He prefers even mediocrity, but from his own family, trusting her with the country and decision-making. As a result, a serious struggle begins within his entourage, affecting his closest associates. Rotenberg, Arkady Romanovich, whom I know personally, becomes a participant in this internal confrontation. I crossed paths with them in my work when they still seemed adequate. Rotenberg, his son, and Kalantirsky, the bank director. We communicated personally. Kalantirsky came to visit me in Ufa when I was vice governor, and we had economic projects. I knew them as businessmen and understood what was going on around them. In fact, they headed the Rotenberg clan, an informal authority under Putin, which was known in a narrow circle as Parilka. It was a code name for informal meetings with Putin at Rotenberg's dacha in St. Petersburg, where they discussed key issues of the country's development and major projects.
Что когда они с Путиным общаются в неформальной обстановке, это происходило на даче у Ротенберга в Санкт-Петербурге, и вот там обсуждаются важнейшие вопросы развития страны и самые крупные проекты.
The steam room belonged to Arkady Rotenberg, and the fact that he had been dealt a powerful blow became obvious not only to the establishment, but also to the general public. Even pro-Kremlin political analysts, including Markov, almost directly accused the Rotenbergs of eliminating Starovoyt to prevent him from testifying about embezzlement of the defense budget and irregularities in the construction of strategic facilities. This is especially significant given that Rotenberg is Putin's closest friend, whom the latter has repeatedly called his friend at press conferences. Such a blow is not only to the clan itself, but also to the head of state. People are able to draw conclusions. Tell me who your friend is, and they have been friends for more than 50 years. From childhood, they went to the judo section together, and later Arkady became Putin's coach.
Ходили в одну секцию по дзюдо еще когда были прям совсем детьми крошечными. Потом, когда Путин подрос и продолжал заниматься дзюдо, там Аркадий Ротенберг превратился в его тренера.
When he first started appearing, he was called coach. It was his semi-clique, an echo of his close relationship with Putin, as if a shadow of Sagaleto. The coach-pupil model formed a special emotional bond between them, not just the friendship of two peers, but authority and dependence. For years they have been side by side, and for a long time it was thought that the Rotenbergs' position was unshakable, but now they are seriously shaken, and a response is likely to follow. Aging dictators often have a throwaway syndrome. It's not a topic I've brought up before on my airwaves or on other channels, but it's worth emphasizing. Just because Putin allowed the hit on the Rotenbergs doesn't mean it's final. Dictators as of late are prone to impulsiveness, shifts, and paranoia. Many years in power warps thinking, creates a sense of inner schizophrenia, and decisions become less and less predictable.
Понимаете, какая штука? Ведь то, что сейчас Путин вот дал эту атаку на Ротенбергов осуществить, это же не означает того, что это навсегда. Диктаторы, они мечутся, престарелые. У них с головой не в порядке, у них шизофрения от количества лет, проведенных во власти.
It's a diagnosis. In a couple days he may be clutching his head. What have I done? These are my closest friends. And call Rothenberg back into office. Everyone who was behind the anti-Rothenberg campaign will be in shock, shaking in the waiting room, wondering what the two reconcilers will decide. In Russian politics, such twists and turns by aging people in power happen all the time. I have seen it many times. That's why I expect such a turn in this story as well. The tension will not subside. Those who initiated the attack can no longer stop, because the stakes are too high. Everything is turning into a snowball, an avalanche that sooner or later sweeps away such regimes. And the external environment only intensifies the process. Social upheavals, interethnic fissures, and growing discontent.
Такую лавину, которая сносит к чертям собачьим вот подобные режимы. И этот режим вот так, скорее всего, и будет снесен. Ну, плюс внешний антураж. Это, конечно, социальные проблемы, взрывы, значит, разломы по линии межнациональной.
Thank you very much, Rostislav. I would also like to recall the recent meeting between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Lavrov. What is interesting is that the sides voiced completely different assessments. The Russian Foreign Ministry said that the conversation was constructive and that the parties were getting closer, including economically. At the same time, Rubio confirmed that the conversation went well on the whole, but immediately noted that Trump is disappointed in Putin, and Congress is considering the Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal law on sanctions against countries that buy energy from Russia.
Законопроект Линдси Грэма Блюменталя, санкции стран, которые покупают энергоносители в России.
It was reported that Rubio said, Lavrov offered something new from Putin. I will pass it on to Trump. Probably he just had to indicate progress. It is impossible to openly admit that the conversation has gone in circles again. At the same time, Lavrov noted that he gave Rubio everything that Putin had said back on July 3rd, including quotes from Zelensky, Shmyhal, Yermak, and Podolyak, statements that contained calls for radical action, and therefore Lavrov preferred not to detail them publicly. This shows Russia isn't backing down and still sees the US as either a partner or a weak link, but with international support, including von der Leyen's $150 billion initiative. The Kremlin must see the world is united. If Trump and Congress take a tougher stance, the illusion of compromise will vanish. The real question is whether anyone can convince Putin that his goals are unattainable, or if the conflict will escalate further despite the stalemate.
Вот что может нам, как вы считаете, Ростислав, помешать или объяснить Путину, что его цели недостижимы?
The beauty of envious regimes like Putin's is that it doesn't matter at all what statements the government makes. Their job is to spread absurdity, as Putin himself once put it. They have no authority or real weight. Today Lavrov publishes pathos statements, and a couple of days later Petrov, Ivanov, or Sidorov take his place and say with a serious look that they have always been for peace, for a civilized agreement, for the line of demarcation. Suddenly it turns out that war is not their choice at all, but a forced reaction. And so it goes. Lavrov resigns, and a new person voices the opposite position. He is forgotten about after 2 minutes. No one interviews him. This is how dictatorial regimes function. It does not matter who said what. It is much more important that today there is real pressure and real support for Ukraine, not formal approval. This is what carries weight. The words of the representatives of the lying regime are worth nothing. When I hear another statement from Lavrov, I pass it by my ears like a passing wind or a distant Chinese language opera coming from the open window of someone else's BMW.
пропускаю мимо ушей, ну, как ветерок подул, я не знаю, опера донеслась на китайском языке, значит, из окна раскрытого, значит, БМВ какого-нибудь.
That's roughly how things are. Rostislav, and of course the Caucasus. After yesterday's meeting between Pashinyan and Aliyev in the United Arab Emirates, for the first time without intermediaries, The Economist published a piece saying that Putin is losing control of the region. Even the Zakynthor corridor was discussed, the same corridor that Russia sought to control under the guise of a peacekeeping mission. Aliyev said that Azerbaijan will ensure order on its own, without external interference. Everyone realizes that wherever Russian troops appear, a process of absorption begins, and no one needs such influence anymore. How much of a real defeat is this for Russia? Igor, you mentioned the involvement of Russian troops, but Armenia and Azerbaijan make their own decisions. This brings to mind a phrase of my neighbor in the village. A pig is as good as a regiment. Indeed, her figurative expression is quite applicable to the situation. Armenia and Azerbaijan no longer regard the Russian military as a significant force. This is a flashback, but it reveals the essence of what is happening. So here it is. Is this really another defeat for Putin on the international stage? After waning influence in Iran and Syria, even the Caucasus is now out of control. Armenia is negotiating with Azerbaijan on its own, and Russia is no longer needed here. Igor, you and I have said for hundreds of broadcasts that every rope has an end. The end of the Putin regime was predetermined back in February 2022, when decisions were made that had nothing to do with international law. That was the point of no return. Since then, all adequate responsible countries have turned their backs on a regime that operates outside the legal framework and on the principle of complete lawlessness. It was clear to me from the beginning where things were going. I have never shared the opinion of those who believe that Putin will forever retain control and continue to command. On the contrary, it amazes me how long the Georgian establishment has tolerated representatives of Putin's influence in their government. The trend is obvious. Neither Putin nor his entourage will be there in a year, 2 or 3. Does everyone hope to live to be 90? I don't understand this strategy, but the actions of Armenia and Azerbaijan are completely understandable to me, as is the decision of Ukraine, which has clearly indicated who is worth dealing with. Instead of dialogue with barbarians, thieves, and terrorists from the East, it has chosen the path of cooperation with civilized, cultured, and educated Western countries. This paradigm is universal. It is the same for everyone. Most people in the world are adequate, reasonable people, and dictators like Kim Jong-un, Ayatollahs, and Putin are rather the exception. I call it swamp chuche now. It is all the more valuable to see 2 more countries throwing off this yoke right before our eyes. We are waiting for the continuation. I hope that the elections in Moldova will be successful and that Georgia will finally free itself from Putin's influence. I am counting on that very much. Rostislav, you mentioned that we have already had 1,000 broadcasts. I am waiting for the first 1,000, and I will gladly take part in the 3,000th one. Always a pleasure to be with you, Igor. Thank you, and see you soon.
Я с удовольствием приду и даже на 3001, Игорь. Всегда вам рад. Счастливо.
A reminder to our viewers, Rostislav Murzagulov was with us. Leave feedback and questions. We'll address them in our next talk. Share the broadcast. I'm Ihor Havryshchak. See you on Channel 24.